Hi everyone, welcome to this episode of Diverse Talk Matters.
To talk about different things around diversity, equity, inclusion, talk about things that people may find challenges with, so we hope you find them really useful. Some are around people's different lived experiences, some really challenging conversation, things that sometimes we don't need to talk about. But we really hope you enjoy the range of topics that we are introducing to you or bringing to you, to your homes, to your house, to your workplaces.
We hope you enjoy. Hi everyone, welcome to our podcast. I'm Natasha Broomfield-Reid and I'm the founder of Diverse Matters, and I'm glad and really happy to have a friend and former colleague with us today, Meena. Introduce yourself.
Okay, hello everybody. My name is Meena Kumari and I am the director and founder of Hope Training and Consultancy, and Hope stands for Helping Other People Every Day, and we specialise in domestic abuse, sexual violence and safeguarding training.
Lovely. And I know a little bit about you because for those who don't know, me and I both used to work at Victim Support, an organisation who supported a whole range of people affected by a range of crimes. But tell me about why you set up Hope, when you started that, how it's all been going.
So Hope was set up in 2008, actually, funnily enough. So we celebrated our 15-year anniversary this year, which was amazing. And the reason why it was set up was to really bridge the gap between kind of learning and teaching and educating practitioners around kind of different aspects, in particular domestic abuse. And over the years, the sessions have evolved into other safeguarding issues. We now do a lot more around sexual violence and sexual abuse. And over the past 3 to 4 years, we've been doing a lot more on thinking about racialised communities and anti-racist practice alongside yourself, Tash, which has been amazing, and working with services like yours and other services.
What do you think has changed then in terms of domestic abuse over the last few years?
One of the biggest significant things for our sector is the actual definition. So we now have a standalone statutory definition of domestic abuse. That was updated in 2021. So it includes a lot of things that we talked about years ago. The definition is still 16 and over, but not just physical and sexual violence. We've got to think about what is controlling and coercive behaviour, but also economic abuse. And I think economic abuse is a really interesting one because it's how you, as an individual, you might acquire or maintain money or other property of a victim or a survivor, or obtain their goods, like for your own purpose. And there's been so many other changes that have come in.
Yeah. Okay, brilliant. In terms of sort of the work that you deliver, what's the thing you deliver the most in terms of domestic abuse?
And the biggest thing that we're getting, especially if it's an employer, it's things like, what do you even mean by domestic abuse? Or we've got employees experiencing coercive and controlling behaviour. So we want to know a little bit more about what we can do around that and how best to support them. So it's things like employers want to recognise the signs. They want to know what their policy should look like. If someone does talk about domestic abuse, what can they do? But they also now more and more, a lot of employers are having things called workplace champions. They're having things like flexible working and supportive measures, and being really clear that domestic abuse impacts both sexes. So if it's a male victim, are there any additional barriers or different barriers as opposed to a female victim or a trans victim, or however you identify?
Okay. And thinking about racialised communities, and when we come to terminology in terms of race, we know that there's lots there. So just to let people know, we're going to use the term racialised communities in this podcast. There's not one term that everybody's happy with, but we will be using racialised for this session. Sometimes people use minoritized, some people use global majority, ethnic minorities. But for us today, it's about racialised communities. We've had many, many discussions, haven't we, of the challenges that different people, racialised communities have.
This is something that I feel really passionate about, and it's something that I've really advocated. And I'm also an activist. So, I have no problem with calling people out when racialised communities are not getting access to the right support that they need, especially if they are a victim of domestic abuse or any aspects of violence against women and girls. So it's something it's always high on my agenda.
Have any organisations been resistant to recognising the challenges of racialised communities?
It's really interesting. I think, and I know you and I have talked about this, since the George Floyd murder, there's been a lot more services coming forward wanting to know more about what they could do and embed that real anti-racist practice, but also be acknowledging of the additional issues that racialised communities face. And I think it's not about they're resistant. I think it's the lack of knowledge is still there. People are afraid to ask the question. people are not aware, and I don't think they realise that they're actually not fulfilling the Equality Duty Act, because some of the things that
Definitely.
some of the things they're not putting in place. And it was really interesting, Tash. Only the other day I was on a call, I was delivering training, and I had someone from a health background on. And one of the questions that was raised was actually, you know what, Meena, if you're not happy in that marriage and there's abuse going on and you know your rights, you would just leave. And I had to really remind this individual of the privileges that we have. I'm born in this country. I was educated in this country. I know my rights, because we were talking a lot about on that training session about empowerment, and
Yeah.
the comments that
Yeah.
were being made was actually, you should just be empowered to leave. But
Mm.
what if there are additional barriers like your language? What if English isn't your first language? What about your immigration status? What about the fact that when you go to the police and you might be a black woman or a brown woman, you get told certain things that actually don't sit right with you, or you might not even trust the police?
Mm.
What do you do about that?
Exactly.
So there's something about our own
Exactly.
privileges, and as practitioners on the ground, don't just assume it's easy for someone from a racialized community.
Definitely. And I always say to people, whether it's service delivery or the workplace, and they might have somebody from a racialized community come to you and say, oh, I've got this challenge, and they might seem negative or a bit too aggressive. I said, listen, what you've got to think about is what's happened before they've come to your door. They may have had how many challenges, kickbacks, not treated appropriately, racism, bias, prejudice, you name it. I said, you've got to understand people have come into you and they've been going through barriers before they got to your door. One thing I'm glad you just mentioned is the equality. The minimum is, with the Equality Act, you have to make sure you eliminate discrimination, provide equality opportunity, and foster good relations. That is the basics. If anybody's not doing anything as a service provider, that's what you need to be doing. And people don't realise that means just everybody get an equitable service. And we know they don't, do we? We know that they don't get equity. They are ignored, which is why some domestic abuse providers are set up specifically for racialized communities, aren't they? Because of that, because their needs aren't being met elsewhere. And you think, wow. So it's people often, it's not an intentional thing, but they don't realize I haven't even looked at, am I reaching everybody? Is anybody coming to us, get what they need, rather than being reactive and going, oh my God, we've not got this in place. When I remember many years ago, you mentioned language, and some organisations said, we haven't got budget for interpreters. I'm like, how can you not have it? That means you are refusing people who will need access to services, who are victims. How can you not have interpreting? And even some now will say to us, I'm sure when we've done courses together, that we ask the question, don't we?
Yeah. In 2023, we shouldn't be hearing from frontline services. Remember who are being commissioned by public funds and public money to serve. And they do write this in tender documents, all communities. So if you're going to bid for a contract and you're going to say, we are for anyone who potentially is impacted by domestic abuse, you've got to be really mindful that you are going to have those who might have disabilities, who might be not getting the right access and support because of their race, because of their ethnicity, because of the levels of prejudice out there, sexuality, age, all those things. But I think race is a really interesting aspect, because this is an area that I find a lot of people are fearful of. Or
Definitely.
It's okay, we've done the basics, or actually because we're in a predominantly certain area. And what I tend to hear on training is, well, we are a predominantly white area. It never really impacts us. We're not going to get service use from that area. And it's just reminding them that actually the Equality Act is the basics. There's some non-negotiables that you just said, Tash. We have specialist services that were developed and were set up in this country, and rightly, Southall Black Sisters from the 70s, right to Sister Space, started in 2015. There's reasons why those services are set up, but let's not forget those services have also been cut from a funding perspective. They also get called out from the fact that people call them names online, or they get racism themselves. So there's so many things that go on for those services, but they're still trying to deliver a good service.
And when you said, and I've heard this so many times, I'm seeing nodding going, because when somebody said, some people say to us, oh, we know we're in a mainly white area. Actually, you need to think about it even more then, because what if they're even more in the minority, and you've got less people there from minoritized communities? They're going to feel even more isolated. Then they might decide, well, I want to go live somewhere more rural, more out of the way, to even move from there, from the perpetrator. And then they go into a service who've got no understanding of their need. You need to do it even more so, because you've got to really make sure if they come to you, they feel included. They feel, yeah, I'm going to be supported, and they feel heard and belong. You know, we've talked about language before in terms of materials, but even if you have some information in different languages, something there that people can go, oh yeah, that's for me. They want to work with me. They want to understand, you know, same sort of thing you find in 2023, sadly, still not happening. And again, I know it's not intentional, and there's perception of stereotyping as well.
Yeah.
About who they might have gone to the police or gone to a service provider. And that perception is, oh, but sometimes that's what happened in their communities. Have you ever heard that sort of stuff?
Yeah, definitely. Look, the 4 things that we have seen over and over again, and when I say we, I'm talking about people that work in the sector and people that don't work in the sector.
Yeah.
So on the ground, from research and from victims and survivors that talk to us, the first thing is a lot of this gets normalized. Because if you are experiencing domestic abuse from a perpetrator who constantly says to you, no one's going to believe you, this is part of our culture, my religion allows me to do it, when we know these are all excuses, this isn't true.
Exactly.
A lot of victims, will start to normalize it. And if society normalizes it, what hope does a victim have? The second thing I always say, and I always hear, is access. How are you fully inclusive and accessible to a lot of survivors and victims? And the third and the fourth thing is, the third one is always social attitudes. We're having this conversation today. People will be listening to what we're saying, which is brilliant. But actually, you only need to go out there and have a conversation with people about the social attitude, just about domestic abuse alone, and you will understand how people see it. Now add race to it, and it's an additional factor. And then the fourth thing is mistrust. A lot of survivors and victims don't trust statutory stream services. They may not even know who the services are. They're the 4 things I would say a lot of researchers taught us over the years.
Yeah, no, definitely. And we always talk about this in our courses, don't we? But intersectionality. And the fact that you said that it could be due to race. Domestic abuse in itself is we could do better in as a country and providing. We're getting there. A lot of things are now governed by law, which we didn't have previously, things like that. But imagine the layers of age, race, like you said, disability, sexual orientation, and the challenges that racialized communities face on a day-to-day, employment, housing, you're more likely to be in lower housing, all those sort of things that you're having on top of if you're also a victim or survivor of domestic abuse. So that's the things that, again, people need to recognize the things. So if anybody out there is doing and we're talking about domestic abuse right now, we've got to make sure that, are you making sure that you're meeting people's needs? Have you actually sought out how you meet people's needs? Have you looked at the gaps? A lot of people don't look at the gaps in data. What data do people have? I mean, a lot of people don't even record or monitor who's accessing their services. And that's another thing, isn't it? How are you knowing who you're supporting if you're not even monitoring that information?
Yeah, it's huge. And I think this is why there's been so much backlash. And there's always been backlash to ethnic lumping, like BAME. Because if I go to a meeting and someone says 60% of my BAME service users experience domestic abuse, I want to know, are you talking about Black Caribbean? Are you talking about India? It's like breaking it down. And I think this is the issue that we have. And actually, it's not just frontline services. If you are a commissioner, if you work in a PC team and you are listening to this, if you work for a service that you've got trust fund money or anything like that, and you are giving out grants, what equality impact assessments are you doing? How updated are they? How aware are you of that local community that you are serving? If you are commissioning domestic abuse services, what are you doing around it? Because the problem you've got is a lot of victims have a real fear of not being believed. And because there are so many stereotypes and biases, and let's take the Casey report, the recent Casey report, we know there's levels of institutional misogyny, racism, and homophobia. So you could have a victim who's experiencing all 3 that potentially goes to a service.
Yeah, exactly. You mentioned equality impact assessments, and it's funny, I was thinking the exact same thing earlier. And for those of you who don't know, those who are listening, I urge anybody who is delivering a service to do equality impact assessments. I mean, people must sometimes call them either equality impact assessments, equality analysis. Some health providers call them equality and health analysis. Being proactive and looking at when you are delivering your services or when you're reviewing your services, am I reaching everybody? Am I meeting the needs of the Equality Act for one? Then you look at things like, are there any adverse impacts? Today we're talking about race. So we'd look at, are there any impacts in terms of race, nationality, colour? all face all those things that make you in anything around race and culture. And you, by doing that, I'm telling you, everybody would capture something if they looked at views and equality analysis. I literally sit there and talk to so many people and go, please do one. It will save this, will improve the output and the outcomes and the service delivery no ends, because I've never done one and it's not told me something that's going to help me deliver a service. And I think that's what people want to do. And I find that people aren't doing them as much now.
No, Tash, I'm telling you, honestly, I did a presentation recently to a number of PC different areas, and my presentation, equality impact assessment. The problem you've got is I think some people are still seeing it as a tick box exercise. So it's almost like I have to do it. Not the fact that actually, if you do it, it's not just good for the community. And remember, the community always comes first, the people that we're serving. It's also really good for you as a local authority, as a service, as a model. And like you said, you are going to find something you probably didn't realize and you didn't know. So this isn't an afterthought. Equality impact assessments are not an afterthought. It's an embedded part of your practice.
Definitely. So that's my plea to anybody listening. Please do one. You can come to us. Diverse Matters. We deliver equality impact assessment training. Even if you don't come to us, please go and find them somewhere to do, and find what historically, back in the day when equality impact assessments came out, they were a bit more bureaucratic and they were a bit war and peace. Now, like you said, people thought it was a little tick box, but or they did it reactively, or they do it afterwards quickly, which really wasn't the effect. But if they're done properly, if you make it user friendly, if you incorporate it into your project management processes, your senior leadership, your board processes, then it will just become business as usual, and people will start doing them all the time, won't they? So it's really much about just get it done. That's one thing for anybody listening today. Please, what did you say when you said about the BAME, the chunk, the lump? Many of you watching this might already know, but BAME, Black Asian Minority Ethnic, is a term that's really, a lot of people are moving away from it, because it does ethnically lump in the fact that people, the B, the A and the ME as letters, what can they represent? You think of, racialized communities, how many people fall within that? As people from racialized communities in the millions, that's a lot of people. That was why a lot of people are moving away from that. Any other challenges you face?
I think it's being really mindful that sometimes as soon as you get someone who is from a racialized community, does the domestic abuse almost become othered? And what I mean by that, and I'm not saying we shouldn't have offences around forced marriage or things linking to honour-based abuse or female genital mutilation. Some of them are standalone offences. It's still an abhorrent form of crime. It still comes under violence against women and girls. But as soon as you have a victim, let's be real, an Asian victim or a Black victim or an Arab victim, anything like that, where it's a bit different, or maybe even someone from the traveller community, it becomes othered instead of thinking, actually, are there any additional risks I need to be acknowledging and writing down? So my monitoring of this case needs to be still there, just like I do with a lot of domestic abuse cases, but being really mindful of actually this individual, has their personal views been influenced? When we think about cultural, because a lot of victims and survivors will use the word cultural, how has that been influenced from a society perspective? Politically, where do they sit? So if I work with migrant survivors of domestic abuse in this political landscape, Tasha, if you are a migrant, if you think about asylum seekers or refugees, where are we sitting politically? And at the moment, it's not a very nice space to be in. We're looking quite hostile as a nation. So if I then have a migrant survivor who's experiencing domestic abuse, are they going to report? And actually they might not, because the police are going to deport me, or what's the newspaper saying about migrants at the moment? These are the things we need to be mindful of, and people are forgetting that.
Definitely, in particular, they say this climate now where there is so much negative. I think, with the exception of many immigrants from Ukraine, there is complete negative perception and ongoing about migrants. I mean, this government has its plans a lot of people don't agree with, including myself. And I think it's one of those things that, again, it's that climate that people need to consider and be aware of. Absolutely. One thing you said earlier was like, oh yeah, that's that we are also all talking about, is taking the fear out. Because again, you and I have delivered training where we try and deliver training, don't we? We'd rather you ask the questions. We're here to answer. Fight the fear. No silly question, silly question. We'd rather you ask that question, because some people might be scared, or if I say this, it might be seen as racist or anti-faith, etc., etc. And I think we've both found that people have that fear, don't they? I always say to people, if you've lived in an area where you've not really come across many people in racialized communities, I get it. You might then be unaware, of other people's issues. As a provider, it's your role and duty to find out and learn more. But I find that people are too scared sometimes, fight the fear and take it away, because I'd rather people ask and learn. And I think that's what we do quite well if we say ourselves, because we'll try and get people to go, listen, ask, don't worry about it, because you don't want to go in there challenging.
This is the problem that you and I think as facilitators and trainers, because we've got our own experiences, but we also then work a lot with racialized groups, and we have worked on the front line as well as in a strategic perspective. We can challenge, we can see that difference. And it's okay to be culturally competent. I think it's really good to understand people's backgrounds. And recently I've been reading up some work that Myra Khan, a really, really well-known kind of counsellor and therapist from my area, being culturally attuned with a lot of the services and services that we're working with. And the problem, Tash, that we're always going to have, I find, with a lot of these services that we do work with and we do train, when you go up that food chain, they are still white. Why are these issues going to impact them? They're not going to, because they never see them. Two things. I want to talk about a leadership program, the leadership program for people in domestic abuse in the field. But what we also do is, right, what are you going to do now about it? So it's not an excuse. You've come to us, you recognize, to understand, cultural competence, cultural intelligence. But what are you going to do now? Because as we know, there is plethora. There's so much information out there about racialized communities, about domestic abuse, about female genital mutilation. All those things is out there. Now it's your duty to learn and educate as well yourself. And that's another message we give out. Yes, we're there to facilitate and to bring that on and to challenge and to get people thinking how they can do things better. It was very much action-based, what we deliver. Okay, great, what you're doing. And I think that's what people need to do afterwards. I would let, people need to understand, but know what they're going to do next. Yeah, about 2.5 years, 3 years ago, we started looking at the violence against women and girls sector. And we were really interested to know about the workforce. And then we were commissioned by the Drive Partnership to set up a consortium. And luckily, Tasha was on that consortium, which is brilliant. And we had staff from racialized communities as well as staff and from white communities in that consortium. And our role was to develop focus groups with staff from the Borg sector to think about their experiences in the Borg sector. Those staff were only from racialized communities, and we also interviewed sector leaders. Because I think it's really important that we speak to managers, CEOs, trustees, and team leaders about what are you doing about supporting racialized staff. And then out of that, one of the recommendations was actually to develop and deliver a leadership program. And last year we ran our first pilot, which really, really well. Over 98% of those who attended said that they felt that they'd taken something away from the leadership program. So it was a 10-week online program with a celebration event in London. And then we ran 6 modules for sector leaders. And we covered things like you just talked about. So what is white privilege? But also things like what is white fragility. And actually our trainer was Natasha from here, which was amazing. But also things like, what are you doing about your recruitment and your retention? What are you doing about being culturally competent? They were really interesting sessions. We are now going into our year 2, and we are going to start our next set leadership program. We've had over 20 applications, but the amazing thing is we are looking for bursaries. So we've got some real grassroots buying full services that have applied for these leadership roles. And they will be funded by bursaries. And then the other half of the program will be funded by employers. This should show you, when you talked earlier about the fact that leadership in most sectors, let's be honest, in domestic abuse, at the top, you haven't got people who've got from a racialized community. And often, again, we could do a whole session on enhancement, development, promotion of people from racialized communities, because many people are in the domestic abuse section from racialized communities, but they stay at a certain level, which is why that Meena set up this brilliant project to look at how we enhance, develop the wonderfully talented people. I went to the event and they were given the opportunity to grow and actually show their talent and show that actually they could be a really good leader in the domestic abuse space, which they probably wouldn't have been given before. It was very emotional from all of them. Yeah.
And so again, that just shows you the fact, in terms of your service, we're talking about domestic abuse today. If you're developing services and you're trying to reach people, everybody knows the story of the more diverse teams you have, the more effective, more reactive, can have a greater understanding, etc. Why aren't you doing that in your service delivery? Why haven't you got people from all communities and all levels of the organisation? And for me, it was so good that you did that. And even, we did some of the focus groups, didn't we, before you set up the leadership? And hearing from people, got really good, brilliant data, really good information, great conversations. But again, some people hadn't even thought about what's it like to be from a racialised community.
Yeah.
When a survivor, a victim of domestic abuse comes to the door, what do they need to, you need to think about the different aspects that we've already talked about today.
So if anyone's interested, if anyone's listening to this and you would like to put an application in, the bursary spaces are all gone. But if anyone would like to pay through their company organisation, then please have a look at our website, hopetraining.co.uk. If you look under the leadership programme and just contact us. And I think actually, Tash, you've raised a really good point that there are so many additional factors, because we think about the levels of racism, prejudice and discrimination. What about xenophobia, Islamophobia? It's, like we're seeing some phenomenal work around raising awareness around domestic abuse within the Jewish community. You've got the Muslim Women's Helpline. You've got Sister Space, predominantly just for Black, African or Caribbean women. And this is the problem, Tash. We're just over and over again, we're seeing the same issues over and over again. And I think Hope is more of a bringing it all together and really trying to educate and raise that awareness. And I'm really mindful that there are some fabulous racialized CEOs doing the work on the ground. And because they're doing the doing, they don't always able to get out and do the presentations and do the training. And that's why I'm trying to just fill that gap. As I was speaking to Polly Harar, who's the CEO of the Sharon Project in London only the other day, and Sadish Pal, she's the CEO of Sikh Women's Aid. And their issues are still the same. It's the levels of just not believing their victims. It's the funding. It's being mindful. You might get multiple perpetrators. So how do you liaise with the police on that? It's a minefield, Tash.
Definitely. And sadly, I remember, you can probably test back the calls you did through COVID as well, because that was really good. But when I was on what the calls I was managed to get on, I thought, God, this has not changed from 20 years ago. When my first career was working in the community and working with Black and Caribbean and mixed racial children, African children, because it wasn't domestic abuse necessarily, but the issues of grassroots services are there in the community supporting, not getting access to the big pots of money. And what government and other people need to do, I heard, and I was like, my God, I heard this 20, 30 years ago, where people were saying, but all the big organisations are getting the funding. I'm not saying they do anything great, because they're all good for services, but let's spread it out a little bit. Let everybody have the opportunity. If they're doing really good work, supporting racialised communities, and this is why people like, say, Jewish Women's Aid, you talk about the Sikh service, all those specialisms, people. And it's all about choice as well. So I think we should have specialist organisations, but we should also have mainstream that is able to support everybody.
Yeah.
You should have everybody should have a choice. Some people would want to go to their local community for choice. Some people would rather be more anonymous and go to a wider organisation where they think they might not be identified, etc., etc. Not from the perpetrator, in terms of the people working in the community. But I thought, oh my gosh, this is the same story. How many years later, them saying that we don't get an opportunity for this government funded, because, like you say, often they could be small. They haven't got, they haven't got somebody who can sit and write a funding bid for them. They haven't got somebody, like you say, they can pop out and go to these meetings here, there, and everywhere. And I think that needs to be put into support. Government and whoever is doing the funding needs to provide some support for those small organisations who are then able and equipped to have that and able to access that, because constantly, again, when I was working in community organisations, everything's year, 2 years, 3. I mean, even to the people already working there, you're constantly like, how long am I in this job for?
Yeah,
So
I was once that frontline worker on a 2 to 3 year contract, thinking, do I move out? Do I get a mortgage? Am I going to be able to pay this? Because am I going to be in a job? And I think the short-term contracts in the public sector, they are horrendous, and it's just the way that the sector's in, and it's getting better. But look, I'm really grateful to Nicole Jacobs, our domestic abuse commissioner. She's done a lot of mapping work, looking at
Brilliant.
community-based
I remember the
services.
discussion, did you
Yeah.
think? Yeah.
She was
Yeah.
great on the calls. Women's Aid and Refuge have nationally done a lot of work. Dr. Olumide Adisa from Suffolk University has done some mapping work on the ecosystem around funding, and Rosa have just recently released a report as well, kind of that mapping. But the problem is, and I think you've just hit the nail on the head, is we're having the same conversation 20 years on.
Do you think, come on, seriously?
Yeah.
And even we talk about, again, sadly, slightly change the subject, but there's so many things. Remember we talked about in one of our sessions, like adultification, how young
Yeah.
people are treated in the system, whether it's around domestic abuse or other areas. Nothing's changed. I used to work with young people from racialised communities about 20 plus years ago, and you think, wow,
Yeah.
the same conversations.
The
Come on,
same
people.
conversation, different labelling. And I think the Child Q case in London of the young black girl who was impacted by the strip search was a real, and
Yes.
again, it happened so many months after the George Floyd murder. And that was one of the things we talked about on the call. And again, what are we talking about? Yes, we used the fact that she was, treated almost older. And we know a lot of black girls are treated a lot older. But she was strip searched in her secondary school. And there's just so many things that have gone on and we've seen, and we keep hearing about learning, whether it's from domestic homicide reviews with racialized communities. We've had just this week, I have posted about 2 cases where both perpetrators received over 20 years in regards to sentencing for the murder of their partners. And both of the women that were killed were Asian women, and one of the women was strangled, the other woman was stabbed to death. And it's just how many more women, and we know men are impacted by domestic abuse, but we know statistically more women are dying. How many more women need to be killed? It's horrendous.
Absolutely. And like you say, I'm glad, the commissioner's doing some mapping. That's really good. Long overdue. I want you to tell a little bit about the course you did over COVID, because it was brilliant. And is there anything else like that planned or anything from that?
Yeah. During the first lockdown, we started the calls in kind of April 2020. They were just national calls. We would host them on Zoom, and we focused on domestic abuse within racialized communities. We had hundreds of users every week. And then the end result was we actually commissioned a black and brown academic, Dr. Lumide Adisa, Dr. Roxanne Khan, to look at the data and then to write a report. And the report was called How Black and Brown Women, Influenced and Shaped the Domestic Abuse Sector During Lockdown. And it was an amazing report.
Absolutely.
And one of the key things that came out of that was the fact that a lot of people that came on the call didn't like BAME. They called it ethnic lumping. The other thing was a lot of staff who were from racialized communities didn't always feel like they were having their voices heard. A lot of service users are saying that they were fearful of reporting it. And then what came out of the report was a recommendation to do cross-cultural training webinars, which we've now completed.
Brilliant.
We ran them for 2 years, Tash. Again, hundreds and hundreds of people accessing them.
Yeah.
They're still on the website. What we're moving to now is we are just about to launch a legal podcast. It's called the Hope Podcast, and we have partnered up with TV Edward Solicitors in London. But the key thing is we are linking in with young people, and they are writing the questions. They are organizing the podcasts. And the first 3 podcasts, we are focusing on no-fault divorce. We're focusing on financial arrangements after divorce and child arrangements after divorce.
And it's about helping people move on, isn't it? Because they're the challenges that people have when if they're leaving their partner due to domestic abuse. They're the things that people need to think of. How am I going to survive? What will justice goals? What's going to happen with the children? All that sort of thing. That add a layer of, it's bad enough getting a divorce without domestic abuse, add a layer of domestic abuse, all the things that come with that as well. That's really, really good. You mentioned about this, there were lots of, racialized people copying up domestic abuse services, and the fact that we know it escalated, which is why the government focused so much on it during lockdown, because domestic abuse, imagine people stuck in the home, etc., etc. Tell us a little bit about the Black Women Initiative as well you've got. How many women are on there now?
And the good thing about lockdown was I made so many connections through Twitter, LinkedIn, and just getting to know about what other services were doing. You were almost forced to do that. And we set up something called the Hope Digital Art Project. And initially we showcased 12 Black and brown women from the Borg sector or in association to the Borg sector, and we asked them for quotes.
Yeah.
And then we digitally drew them, and then we put them on our website. We did a launch on Twitter. And then we realized, do you know what? There's loads of us out there doing this. Let's go and find them.
Yeah.
Let's go and showcase their
Yeah.
voices. And a year
Exactly.
later, we had 100 women. So our hashtag Black in DA, capital B.
Yeah.
And also it was a hashtag kind of digital art. So if anyone's interested, please go on the website, hopetraining.co.uk, click onto the digital art project. You can see the women, you can see their quotes. They are phenomenal. All of the women are phenomenal. And what's really interesting is, Tasha, I keep in touch with a lot of those women now, and they've made connections with each other. And it was a really nice project to work on.
That'd be like a really good, you should do a little getting all those 100 people in the room and do a bit of a little networking event.
Oh, I would love to. And it's been on my agenda for about a year and a half. So if anyone's listening and you can give us a room and you can host it and put on a bit of lunch for us, if you want to sponsor us, I'll
do it.
More than happy.
Get some beautiful Black women and Black and racialised people in that room. Honestly, that'd be brilliant. Anything else?
We've started to write, I've started to write a series of blogs on my website. And one of the interesting ones that I wrote was around artificial intelligence and how you can use artificial intelligence, harnessing the power of AI in the violence against women and girls sector. But I also did one on cultural competency. I did one called The Power of Silence, when leaders need to shut up and listen. But also being culturally competent, shattering excuses for abuse. And that was really my really favorite one. I wanted to shift this narrative on culture, and actually culture for me is a beautiful tapestry, and I believe it encompasses beliefs, practices and values. I don't like it when abusers, perpetrators use culture as an excuse. And I definitely don't like it when frontline services say to me that it's because of culture or because of religion. We can acknowledge someone's cultural background. We can acknowledge someone's religion. And we can acknowledge when they're telling us that actually this is what's been told to me growing up. But I want people to embrace cultural competency in a way that we don't use it as an excuse, but also thinking about cultural relativism. And we can't justify it for harm. And as a society, we need to be standing up and talking about abuse, and we need to value empathy, respect and equality, but not at the expense of someone who then goes on to get abused. So that's what it was about.
Exactly. Brilliant. Thanks so much, Meena. I think we're going to draw to a close for now.
Brilliant.
Because what I would say is, if you want to know more, Meena, anyway, if you want to tell me what the website is, please.
Yeah. Find out at www.hopetraining.co.uk. We're also on Twitter, LinkedIn and Instagram.
Oh, right, lovely. And to be fair, Hope, they do things all through the year. If you link in with Hope on the socials, it's very good on the social media. If you want to keep up to date with laws, with what's happening, good practice, and keep an eye on that. So thanks for that, Meena. Really appreciate you. And thank you very much. Thank you so much for tuning into the podcast. Please do spread the word about our channel and tune in for our next episode.